We're going to take you to New Orleans now, where Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is speaking. She's recently tweeted about the immigration crisis at the border, children being separated from their parents, insisting that it is not part of the administration's policy. But let's listen to what she has to say.
Directly from you, from the sheriffs, and from other law enforcement on the challenges of working along the border. On behalf of DHS, I look forward to our continued partnership with the NSA, our nation's sheriffs, and your executive director, Jonathan Thompson. Jonathan is a good friend to the department. He's no stranger to us. He is a great advocate for you and a great partner to the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. So as sheriffs, I'm going to tell you something you already know. You are a vital part of our Homeland Security team. You truly are on the front lines. And so it's a privilege to be here today to have an opportunity to thank you for the commendable, often dangerous job you do every day. Sadly, as was just mentioned earlier, we were reminded of that danger with the loss of two members of the Sheriff family last week. Deputy Sheriff Teresa King and Deputy Sheriff Patrick Roher, as you know, were killed in the line of duty. And I join all of you in mourning the loss of these dedicated officers. I also want you to know that my thoughts and prayers are with the law enforcement community always. I'm always praying for the job that you do. Law enforcement is a calling for a select few who are tireless, faithful, and dogged in executing their duty to protect their communities from danger and in honoring their oaths to uphold the law. On behalf of the men and women of DHS, thank you for your dedication and your sacrifice. Please know that DHS is your partner and will be by your side as we protect our borders, enforce our immigration laws, and defend our communities. As many of you know, DHS is the largest law enforcement agency in the country. I am proud to support all law enforcement, your passion, your mission, your commitment to fight for what you need to do to protect your communities. I will always support you. You have an advocate in me, and just as I do for the men and women of DHS, I will carry the banner to get you the authorities, tools, and resources that you need to do the job the American people ask. So on that point, to a select few in the media, Congress, and the advocacy community, I'd like to start with a message for you. This department will no longer stand by and watch you attack law enforcement for enforcing the laws passed by Congress. We will not apologize. We will not apologize for the job we do or for the job law enforcement does for doing the job that the American people expect us to do. Unfortunately, for political gain, as we have seen, some politicians are trying to pit state and local law enforcement officials against federal officials. This blue-on-blue approach is a disservice to the public and every law enforcement official around the country, and it must stop. This morning, I want to discuss with you three threats that will require collaboration and partnership with you. I want to start off by addressing what Congressman Scalise already captured so well, so I'll keep some of it brief. But one of the most prominent homeland and national security threats facing the department and many of you today is the threat to our nation resulting from the lawlessness at our borders and a lack of respect for our immigration laws. Make no mistake, our border is in crisis. We might not be seeing the numbers that we saw at the height of 2014, but we're seeing increase in drugs, increase in traffickers, increase in smuggling, increase of terrorist awareness of the loopholes that allow those to enter illegally and stay within our communities. We also see thousands of people who have no respect for our laws, and we see our inability, once we apprehend them, to detain them and deport them. As I mentioned last month in Douglas, Arizona, I had the opportunity to meet with a group of sheriffs whose communities are often on these front lines as smugglers, traffickers, and transnational criminal organizations take advantage of our unsecure border. I would especially like to thank Sheriff Daniels of Cochise County for hosting that meeting. And thank you to Sheriffs Layton, Martinez, Napier, Wilmot, and Wolfinger for sharing your thoughts and concerns with me. During that meeting, we agreed to establish a periodic meeting schedule, and I look forward to sitting down with you again in July. These sheriffs see firsthand that border security at its heart is an issue of law and order. Whether it's CBP or ICE agents and officers or local law enforcement, these professionals confront the ugly business of human trafficking and drug and human smuggling on a daily basis. But they also confront the reality of the humanitarian crisis unfolding. From rescuing illegal immigrants in the desert to uncovering them in packed and overheated trailers, law enforcement bears witness to the effects of our most vulnerable, our children. And the gang violence and recruitment of children is not limited to illegal alien children. During my visit last month, the sheriff shared with me a picture, a horrific one, of a 14-year-old boy, an American citizen, who was recruited by a Mexican drug cartel to smuggle drugs. That kid, unfortunately, way in over his head, lost his load of drugs. In retaliation, he was repeatedly stunned with a taser and savagely beaten with a board. The picture, to say the least, was difficult to look at. These cartels are infiltrating our communities, corrupting children, and hurting our citizens. Make no mistake, they are not humanitarians. They prioritize profit over human life. Our challenge moving forward as a community is to identify what we can do to address these complex problems together. The men and women who have sworn to protect our communities have expressed their frustration with previous administrations failing to act. Thank you, President Evanson, for your recent letter to me underscoring this point. But that failure to act has changed under this president. Securing our nation's borders and empowering the men and women in uniform on the front lines to carry out their missions is a priority for this president, this department, and for me personally. Our Border Patrol agents are working tirelessly with you, but they need additional resources and authorities. That's why President Trump is calling for a border wall system. The operators have spoken and asked for a system in very specific, very defined areas of the border. As a result, we are building the first new wall in 10 years. But this system goes way beyond a wall and includes, as the Border Patrol and our nation's sheriffs have requested, the technology, transportation infrastructure, and personnel to support a secure border. While we are very glad to have construction underway, we need Congress to fully fund the border wall system, and I am hopeful that legislation soon to be acted on in the House will authorize these resources. But there's more that needs to be done beyond a wall system. We must continue to enforce the laws as passed by Congress and to close dangerous legal loopholes that serve as pull factors to those seeking to illegally enter the country. We need to be clear. Illegal actions have and must have consequences. No more free passes, no more get-out-of-jail-free cards, no more lawlessness. Today, DHS is referring those who illegally cross our borders to the Department of Justice for prosecution. I'm sure you'll hear more about this later from Attorney General Sessions. It is important to note that every day in communities across the country, if you commit a crime, the police will take you to jail, regardless of whether you have a family. I want to take a minute to address the consequences of actually enforcing our immigration law. There has been much outcry, consternation, and frankly misinformation from many in the press, in Congress, and advocacy groups over the last few weeks that we at DHS are intentionally doing things that are unhumanitarian, that are cruel, immoral, and disgraceful. We are doing none of those things. We are enforcing the laws passed by Congress, and we are doing all that we can in the executive branch to protect our communities. It is now time that Congress asks to fix our broken immigration system. DHS and you on the border and in your communities around the country are faced with the reality not of our making. We cannot detain children with their parents, so we must either release both the parents and the children. This is the historic get-out-of-jail-free practice of the previous administration, or The adult and the minor will be separated as a result of prosecuting the adult. Those are the only two options. Surely it is the beginning of the unraveling of democracy when the body who makes the laws, rather than changing them, asks the body who enforces the laws not to enforce the laws. That cannot be the answer. It is important to note that these minors are very well taken care of. Don't believe the press. They are very well taken care of. You know this, as many of you have detention facilities of your own. We operate according to some of the highest standards in the country. We provide food, medical, education, and all needs that the child requests. Let's be honest, there are some who would like us to look the other way when dealing with families at the border and not enforce the law passed by Congress, including, unfortunately, some members of Congress. Past administrations may have done so, but we will not. We do not have the luxury of pretending that all individuals coming to this country as a family unit are in fact a family. We have to do our job. We will not apologize for doing for our job. We have sworn to do this job. This administration has a simple message. If you cross the border illegally, we will prosecute you. If you make a false immigration claim, we will prosecute you. If you smuggle illegal aliens across an extraordinarily dangerous journey, we will prosecute you. But I have also made clear you do not need to break the law of this country by entering illegally to claim asylum. If you are seeking asylum, go to a port of entry. For months, staff at CBP, ICE, and USCIS and I have been on the Hill briefing members about the threat posed by these loopholes and discussing ways to close them and to fix our broken immigration system. So let me take just a couple minutes to walk you through a few of these legal loopholes that DHS and you and your communities must confront every day and the solutions that we have requested from Congress. First, under existing law, certain unaccompanied alien children from Mexico and Canada who enter illegally and have no valid claim to stay can be quickly returned home, but unaccompanied children from every other country in the world must be transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services within 72 hours and then released to parents or guardians within the United States. This is a significant pull factor that encourages these children to make the dangerous journey north. And it also belies the fairness of the system. We should be treating those from countries the same. Why is our system built on treating people from Mexico and Canada different than any other country coming to the United States for various reasons? Additionally, when a child is apprehended with their parents, DHS is required, due to various court rulings, to release the child within 20 days. As I mentioned earlier, this get-out-of-jail-free card for families and groups who pose at families has spread. The word of this has spread. The smugglers and traffickers know these loopholes better than our members of Congress. I am sad to say that from October 2017 to this February, we have seen a staggering 315% increase in illegal aliens fraudulently using children to pose as family units to gain entry into this country. This must stop. All this does is put the children at risk. To address these issues, we've asked Congress to change the law to allow for the expeditious return of unaccompanied alien children, regardless of their country of origin. We are also asking Congress to allow us to keep families together while they are detained. These fixes would go a long way toward discouraging families from sending children on the harrowing journey to the U.S., resulting in fewer children in the hands of gangs such as MS-13 and more adults facing the consequences of their actions. Second, our system for asylum is broken. We are a compassionate country that has taken in millions of refugees and granted asylum to hundreds of thousands over the last few decades or assisted them near their home countries. Since 1975, the United States has welcomed more than 3 million refugees from all over the world, and each year typically admits nearly 2/3 of the world's settled refugees. That is more than all other countries combined. So unfortunately, because we have an incredibly low standard for claiming credible fear as part of the asylum process, our generosity is being abused. As a result, over the last 7 years, we have seen the number of individuals claiming asylum skyrocket. Before 2011, approximately 1 out of every 100 people arriving illegally claimed credible fear and sought asylum in the United States. Today, that number is 1 out of every 10. The result of such a low threshold for an initial credible fear screening is an asylum backlog of 600,000 cases. These applicants sit in limbo for years waiting for resolution. After passing the unnecessarily low standard of initial screening, applicants can live and work in the United States for years. This is true even for the 80% who are ultimately rejected for asylum at their final adjudication after multiple appeals. For the 20% who truly need asylum, they are mired in the years-long backlog and remain in limbo. To address this issue, we've asked Congress to adjust the standard of proof to prevent well-coached applicants from uttering the magic words indicating a fear of returning home. This change would ensure that those who deserve asylum find it quickly so that they can begin their new lives in our country. Finally, as you well know, many communities have adopted sanctuary policies that protect criminal aliens from federal law enforcement. I don't need to tell you more about this. But instead of turning their criminals over that are in their custody to ICE to face immigration proceedings consistent with our law, these communities shelter them and release the criminals back onto our streets. They often refuse to simply cooperate with us as we attempt to enforce the law. To address these issues, and as Congressman Scalise mentioned, we are asking Congress to fully authorize ICE detainers and, importantly, to provide indemnification for jurisdictions who willfully comply. Removing criminal aliens in controlled environments such as jails protects the men and women of ICE, your men and women within your facilities, as well as the local communities who otherwise are put at the mercy of those being released into the communities. I would encourage you all to reach out to members. Ensure your voices are heard. It is important that you also have the ability and the authority to protect your communities and to work with federal law enforcement. In the meantime, as ICE's state and local law enforcement partners are increasingly challenged in court for facilitating the secure and orderly custodial transfer of criminal aliens to ICE, NSA has been a strong partner in working with us to address this public safety issue. For example, as many of you know, NSA and the major county sheriffs of America worked with us at ICE to develop a new process to clarify that aliens held by these jurisdictions are held under the color of federal authority. This thereby affords local law enforcement liability protection from potential litigation as a result of faithfully executing their public safety duties. Earlier this year, ICE announced 17 basic ordering agreements with various Florida sheriffs that aim to prevent the release of criminal aliens back into the community. ICE is instituting this process with a small number of partner jurisdictions in order to ensure a smooth rollout, but intends to gradually expand implementation with willing law and partners over the coming months. I ask you to reach out if this might be something of interest to you. Going into this week's vote in Congress, my message to members is clear. You have a choice. If you want to secure our borders, if you want to keep gangs such as MS-13 out of our communities, if you want to address the fundamental issues driving illegal immigration, if you want to restore the rule of law, you must close the legal loopholes. However, If you want to support a broken immigration system that harms the interest of Americans and our security, that rewards those who thumb their noses at our laws, and who puts families and children needlessly at risk, then don't vote to fix the problem. It's a simple choice, and I ask you, I urge you to take action. For those who have complained about this administration's vigorous enforcement of the law and the results of that enforcement, this is your opportunity to work with us to fix the incentives that encourage and even reward people who violate our laws and, even worse, put themselves and their families at risk of harm in the hands of smugglers and gangs. This is a complex and emotionally charged issue. It will take courage and cleared-eye solutions to address. I am optimistic that we will see members this week roll up their sleeves and work with us to fix these challenges. As Secretary, I'm willing to work with any member who seeks to solve this. I ask you to reach out. I know I certainly will be reaching out to you this week. As Representative Scalise said, it is an issue that every one of the last 4 administrations has faced. It's time to fix it. So let me just quickly touch on a brief few issues that we have in common. Human trafficking. Aside from immigration, we also have several other challenges that we face as a community that requires our collaboration. Today, almost every community is affected by the modern-day slavery known as human trafficking. President Trump has made combating this a priority across the government and has directed federal agencies to jointly address this significant problem. At DHS, we leverage our law enforcement resources to target traffickers and disrupt and dismantle their criminal enterprises all along their illicit pathways. ICE Homeland Security Investigations conducts law enforcement operations for both international and domestic trafficking cases, and ICE victim assistance specialists help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. In 2017, ICE HSI initiated 833 human trafficking cases, resulting in 1,602 criminal arrests and the identification and/or rescue of 518 trafficked victims. USCIS provides eligible non-citizen trafficking victims with immigration relief, and Customs and Border Protection identifies victims along our borders and at our ports of entry. Our Federal Law Enforcement Training Center teaches law enforcement professionals to identify victims and conduct trafficking investigations. It's no secret that TCOs are using their networks to smuggle dangerous drugs, illegal aliens, and potential terrorists into our country. These TCOs, as you well know, have no concern for human lives. They are solely motivated by profit. These criminal networks are a significant and persistent threat to our nation's security, and we are working with you tirelessly to stop them. One example is Operation Safe Haven, an investigation into a loosely affiliated organization that coordinated the illegal movement of women from Mexico and Central America across the southern border and into brothels throughout the southern United States. As we saw in that operation, while human trafficking and human smuggling are not synonymous, human trafficking, of course, referring to people who are transported against their will, people who are illegally smuggled into this country are easy prey for traffickers, and we see more and more a connection between the two. So we must raise awareness. As the ICE special agent in charge in Atlanta said, this investigation identified women victimized through fraud, force, and coercion, including underage teens. At the Department of Homeland Security, the Blue Campaign is our unified effort to raise public consciousness about trafficking and bring traffickers to justice. We have toolkits, training products, and other resources on our website. They help private industry and law enforcement recognize the signs of trafficking specific to their line of work. I ask you to be part of our team and part of this greater global fight against human trafficking. The final topic I'd like to discuss briefly also affects every corner of the country. Representative Scalise also touched on this, and that is the drug trade, a massive source of income for TCOs and a key driver of desperation and violence on both sides of the border. The drug trade in the U.S. has reached epidemic levels, particularly with regard to opioids, which kill more than 115 of our fellow Americans every day. In April, I met with some of your NSA members as well as members of the National Association of Counties for a roundtable discussion on the opioid crisis. Many of you have seen this crisis in action every day. All state, local, and county resources are facing challenges. Emergency medical services are overwhelmed. There are challenges with foster care for children of opioid-addicted parents, and county budgets are being stretched to their limit. This is why the President worked with the U.S. Congress to provide for $6 billion in the next 2 fiscal years to address this growing crisis in our country. Despite the pull on your limited resources, at-capacity detention facilities, healthcare challenges, and personnel shortages, you have been more than willing to assist the federal government in our efforts. During the recent opioid roundtable, I listened with interest as some of your association members made presentations or commented about innovative initiatives being created in counties throughout the country to provide alternatives to solving this solution. The sacrifices you are making and the challenges you are facing have not gone unnoticed, and I want to say thank you for joining us in this fight as well. At DHS, combating this public health emergency is an all-hands effort, and we are tackling the problem at all stages, from the source, at the border, in the interior, over the internet, and through the mail. DHS, together with the Departments of Justice and State, work with law enforcement counterparts throughout the world, particularly those from China, Mexico, and South America, to share information on known sources. These efforts are also forward-looking. We are monitoring how the crisis continues to evolve. We'd like to share those trends with you so that you can plan and be prepared. But that is only one part of our approach. We are equally focused on stopping opioids and other drugs crossing our borders, and CBP plays a critical role in the department's counter-narcotics efforts. Last year, CBP seized millions of pounds of drugs, and illustrating the violence and corruption inherent in trafficking and smuggling, millions of dollars and thousands of firearms. Our efforts are not limited to our land borders, of course, and the Coast Guard plays a vital role as well, seizing a record 223 metric tons of cocaine with a street value of $7.2 billion, and handed more than 600 suspected drug smugglers over to the Department of Justice for prosecution. In the interior of our country, HSI investigates opioid smuggling domestically through Border Enforcement Security Task Force. HSI currently operates 62 BESTs in locations throughout the United States, and through these, we leverage your help. There's over 1,000 federal, state, local, and foreign law enforcement agents and officers representing over 100 agencies that work together to target opioid smuggling. For those of you who have joined our task forces, we thank you, and we ask others to consider joining as well. We also perform an essential role in detecting, investigating, and preventing the sale and distribution of opioids through the internet. Representative Scalise mentioned additional authorities that we seek. I'd like to thank his leadership and others in the House for working on the STOP Act, which is the Synthetics Trafficking and Overdose Prevention Act, to give DHS more information to prevent the entry of these drugs through our mail. I cannot overstate this. We cannot win this fight alone. The sheer magnitude of the opioid epidemic requires us to expand and strengthen our existing partnerships throughout the world, throughout our nation, and of course with you, our sheriffs. So allow me to end with a call for continued partnership. You are on the front lines of all of these fights. You are our eyes and our ears. You know your communities and their needs. And whether it's TCOs, illegal migration flows, human trafficking, or opioids, we cannot address these challenges without your input. We need your experience, your expertise, and your insights. And today, I ask you to consider the many ways we can strengthen our partnership. I invite you to join one of our many task forces to take the training DHS offers or to share trends and patterns through suspicious activity reporting and the National Network of Fusion Centers. During my recent visit with border sheriffs that I mentioned earlier, I suggested one approach that I'd like to mention today, which is to formalize the solicitation of your ideas by forming a working group to the Homeland Security Advisory Council. The Council is designed to tackle tough issues in the Homeland Security enterprise and to provide me as Secretary with practical solutions. I'd like to ask you to consider this as a mechanism, and I look forward to working with your leadership to make this possible. By partnering together, we will not only realize important advancements in the safety and security of the nation, we will build resilience in our communities. And most of all, I ask you to let us know what more you need from us. With me here today from our Office of Partnership and Engagement's Office of State and Local Law Enforcement, our Assistant Secretary for Partnership and Engagement, John Hill, and Deputy Assistant Secretary Brian Doro. Seek them out. Tell them what more we can do to support your efforts. I am also excited to announce today that I will soon be appointing Scott Erickson as my law enforcement advisor. Many of you know Scott. He works today in our Office of Partnership Engagement and is also here with us today. Soon, he will be bringing his deep law enforcement background into my office to make sure your voices are heard and that our partnerships can be deepened. The protection of our homeland can only be successful through partnership. I look forward to working with you on the challenges I discussed today, as well as emerging threats such as drones and chem-bio attacks. Please share lessons learned, what is working and what is not within your communities. Tell us the trends you see. I am honored to work alongside each and every one of you, and thank you to all sheriffs for making our country secure. Thank you very much.